Okay. Welcome, everyone. This is the presentation section of session one for the SPH Grant Writing Accountability Group. It's a very small crowd today, just me and Jason. Um, but we are going to continue with our agenda and at least do the presentation part of this so that you have this as a resource. There is some really great information that I think would be super helpful for everybody, but especially new faculty. And so, for our agenda that I had sent today, the first thing that we'll be going over is just kind of a brief introduction of grants, how to find appropriate grant applications, timing of submissions, things of that nature. And then, Jason's going to take over and then he'll be talking more about timing of grants as it's related to your particular career path, your trajectory, and talk a little bit about strategy as well, what kind of awards, when to apply, how one grant leads into the other. And then into kind of the meat of it, which is the specific aims, which is like, you can't do a grant without specific aims. It's very important. So we're going to go ahead and get going. So let me see. Oh, there we go. There's our introductions. Do you want to just like move the slides for me? Thank you. Next slide, please. That's our quick agenda. Next slide. Okay, this is just like a very, very quick overview about what grants are. It's basically a funding mechanism in order for you to fund ideas, projects, provide public services, and that's me. I'm so sorry. Um, and when you receive the award, when you receive the award, then you do the project, whether it's research, if it's a community engagement or service project, whatever it is. Next slide. These are the different kinds of grants. If you're not aware, there's so many different kinds, but basically what we focus on here in academia are program or project grants. Next slide. There's several different kinds. School of Public Health, typically we go for a lot of NIH and NSF. However, there is a variety of funding sources that you should also consider, especially if you're an early investigator, because these smaller projects may be one good practice, first of all, for you to kind of get into the groove of developing budgets and scope of work and, specific aims. Same thing with family foundations. And of course, working with state and city agencies is very important. It's great if you have established a long time relationship with them because then you continue getting projects and work. And then you get to also be kind of like tied into the community. And so lots of reasons to work with state and city awards. Next slide. So just a few definitions for everyone. I'm not going to go through everything, but I wanted to make sure that you had some idea of what all of these things mean. Specifically, I'd like to focus on matching and in-kind contributions. There are some applications oftentimes will ask for a cost share or matching, and that's what this means. For UNLV, we, typically will match in terms of time and effort. It is highly unlikely, and I have not seen one in a very long time where we're actually matching in like dollar amounts of funds. So these are things to keep in mind when you have a project that is requesting matching or in-kind contributions. Next slide. So grants.gov is a great place to start. I'm going to do a whole different little webinar kind of further down the line about, different ways for you to look for opportunities for yourself and then, find local places where you can sign up for a bunch of listservs and they can just blast out every time they have a bunch of new funding announcements. And I highly recommend if you haven't gone on grants.gov and put yourself on a bunch of lists to be contacted for new notices, then you should like as soon as possible. Next slide, please. We also have different funding categories. Please make sure that you're paying attention to the kinds of grants that you're looking at. Make sure that we're eligible. We are a state organization. We're a nonprofit educational facility. We are a minority serving institution. These are all things to keep in mind, when you're looking and reviewing criteria for who is eligible to apply for these grants as well. And I think this was your slide, right, Jason? I'm gonna,
So this is something I use. It's for NIH grants. So a lot of the grants that I have experience looking for, are at NIH. So what's cool about this, and I'll talk more about it, but you can put in the different categories, you can put in keywords, but you can also search by the different institutes at NIH or centers and see what are the current funding announcements that they have available. So I just wanted you to have access to this. If you click the link, you'll be able to kind of look at just NIH grants versus the grants.gov, right, is going to go across. It could be CDC grants, basically any federally funded grants are listed there, but this is specific for NIH. So here I just wanted to give you some of the NIH institutes that are there, just to give you an idea whether you're looking, really a strategy to be thinking about is your research program. So if you have expertise, for instance, in cancer or aging, you're looking at substance use or abuse, right? You want to consider some specific institutes that fund research in that area. I also put down there just some examples. There are also centers that come out with unique funding opportunities, and so sometimes you may want to look at those as well. Next, I wanted to talk a little bit about just like the NIH grant mechanisms to give you a little background and some things to consider. So I'm starting first with just research projects. And these have sort of different requirements and sort of think about your area in terms of your progression in your career. So an R01 is sort of the gold standard grant. These are typically multi-million-dollar grants. One of the big pieces with this is you have to be able to usually demonstrate that you have expertise and potentially research already. So in the forms of like preliminary data to support the research you're proposing. These typically are around 5 years, but it really depends on the institute and the proposal. They often will specify how many years they're supporting. Many people early in their career may go for like an R03. This is a really small research grant, max of around $50,000 per year. With this one, most people use this for secondary data analysis. So if there's an existing data set out there, could be behavioral risk factor surveillance system. It could be, another R01 funded project that's ended, but there's an opportunity for you to analyze the data and answer some research questions. I've also seen some people be successful in like primary data collection for this, but you have to remember it's such a small amount. I think typically these are about 2 years. And so you don't get a lot of support in terms of supporting investigators. It's really would only pay and not very much for some, really pilot type research. The next mechanism is an R21. These are exploratory kind of developmental grants. While they often say you don't need preliminary data to get for these, often they're supposed to help you generate that. They're very competitive still. So I think these can be between 2 to 3 years. They're also a smaller, I think the max, if I'm recalling, is maybe around like 2,075 is typically what's funded in those. These tend to be very competitive. Senior people also go after these to get some additional preliminary data to support maybe a larger grant or a small sub piece of it. So, but they're available to do. There's also some unique grants, which you may see some of our faculty, things like an R15, which is really focused more on academic research. We're also starting to see academics partnering with small businesses, so often for-profit institutions. And there's these R43, R44 mechanisms that are really focused on innovation, maybe development and testing of a new product. All of them still need to address like a health outcome. And then there are program projects. These are sort of usually have multiple basically R01s embedded into them. So these are going to be also 5 years on average and right? These could be multi-million dollar, so over $10 million. Many of them have, 2 to 3 R01s built into them. The next mechanisms that I think are really important for junior faculty are going to be these research career awards, as well as thinking about if you have any students, you could support them with a pre-doctoral fellowship, the F31. Maybe you have a PhD student that's graduating and wants to continue to get some research training, so an F32. Yeah.
I had a
Oh,
question.
oh.
Okay. So when you're talking about these like early awards, okay, as I'm just listening, you're saying pre-doctoral, postdoctoral. Can you talk a little bit more about kind of like what point in academia or like of their career, like at that time, would be because to me, like I don't know, right? I've never gone through a postdoc and tried to do any of these programs. At what point would be the best time for me to consider each of these, like the F31, 32, and KO1, for example? Like if I were a student and I just finished my PhD, for example.
Yeah, so the F31, usually students get this maybe after they've done like 1 or 2 years in their PhD program. There are different mechanisms to support a dissertation, so this would not be an award that you would go after for just a dissertation project. So an F31 will support training. So potentially, if you had an advanced master's student who wanted to apply for this and they had already gotten accepted into the doctoral program, they could be competitive to get this. But often, many students get this maybe after their first year of being in the doctoral program. I believe the max of these are around 3 years. Um, the F32 is usually something, so again, if you haven't been working with a recent PhD grad for a while, this could be written in their last year of their PhD program, so they could be funded and stay with you. But often what I find is I'll bring on a postdoc for the first year, and during that first year, they're working on writing their F32 application. This will also support them for 2 to 3 years. I believe there's like a max amount. I think it's maybe 6 years, 5 or 6 years, but I have to look at it that you could have these NRSA support. There's also like T32s, which are training grants. They're an institutional training grant, and so those support pre-doctoral and postdoctoral, but these are actually awards, for the Fs, they're individual awards. Yep.
Sorry, so many questions. Okay, so for the F31 and the 32 then, are these if a student were awarded these and you said they're about 2 years, right? If they were somehow like kind of ending their program and they still had money, is this money that they take with them? Is their funds or does it stay with the school? Is it akin to startup funds, I guess, is what I'm saying.
Yeah, no. So it is actually tied to the institution.
Okay.
So some students will stay, beyond their PhD. So I think it will finish through like maybe the end of summer or something. Let's say they graduated in May, but they're not going to leave until August. It could support them for those few months, but the grant is tied to the institution. So when the student or postdoc leaves, this grant doesn't go with them. So it's a different kind of, it's still many of the other grants, right, are supposed to go with the investigator, but these have to be negotiated after you get it. Sometimes those awards are tied to the institution. The next ones are K awards, and here these are for usually early career individuals. So they have different guidelines based on the different mechanism. But typically it's around, they don't want to see more than 6 years of postdoctoral training. The KO1, this is going to be for people with a non-clinical terminal degree, so a PhD or something equivalent. The KO8s and the K23s, these are for clinicians. So specifically people that are either, a clinician doing clinical research or is doing patient-oriented research, but they have a clinical practice. The K99 ROO is a unique one. One, the eligibility, most of these grants require that you be a US citizen. For the K99 ROO, that is not required, and it actually supports people for about 2 years for their postdoc and then is transitioning them to independence. So they have the equivalent of an RO1 award for the last 3 years. So typically, this is someone that maybe has been pretty productive in their PhD program. Maybe they did like 1 year of a postdoc. They have a really strong publication record and can demonstrate they have a research program. And then they apply for this, get 2 additional years of training as a postdoc, and then they can move this grant with them to another institution. So the intent of the ROO phase is actually to encourage faculty to get a tenure track position at another institution. Sometimes you can stay at the same institution if they offer you a position. These also pay a little bit more than a traditional postdoc. So I believe now these rules change, but the K99 phase, you're making a minimum of like 75,000 towards your postdoc for your salary, and then you can also collect more effort on the ROO phase than traditional RO1s, so you don't have the same caps in terms of salary. Yeah, more.
So, so all the Ks, are they awards that go travel with you? Like are the Ks are like for you as an investigator. So if you get them at one university and you decide you're going to move, that money, your startup funds come with you. The question I have is, how much do they take in indirect costs when that happens? Is there a big chunk of money that happen? Like, can you talk about the pros versus cons about taking your K award, I guess, from one place to another? I bring it up because as the administrator, I've certainly done that a few times, and I don't think a lot of people think about the consequences financially of doing something like that. So could you speak to that just a little bit?
Yeah. So the K awards are an award that is to the individual, but they do have to be, housed at a either a university or an equivalent kind of research institution that has an agreement with the NIH. So they are movable. The example, I had a KO1, I think for about a year and a half, and I then moved to UNLV and I brought my KO1 with me. There are some downsides if you're considering like your indirect cost recovery, some of those. So the K awards do not, I think it doesn't apply to the K99 ROO. Those pay more in indirect costs. So our current rate is 51.5%. I believe those cover that, but the other Ks, I think it's around like 15%. I'm not, it's definitely much lower than the traditional indirect cost rate. So you're not going, the different awards also limit how much you can put towards your salary. So a KO1 is supposed to support all these 75% effort, but the max a KO1 will pay is 75K towards your salary. I believe the K23 pays 100K towards salary, and probably something similar for the KO8. I just don't know as much about how much, but I know that clinicians get paid a little more than research faculty, so they have higher rates for your salary that they'll cover. And you have to demonstrate, right, that you have the protected time and that you'll be working on the research. Most of these require, at least 75% of your time is protected to work on the research and training plan. So this is a unique award. You still have to write a research strategy, specific aims, but what's also unique about this is you have to write a career development plan and identify mentors that will support you in that plan. So they're a little bit different, but Maura's right. The indirect rates on K awards, most of them is not as high as some of the research project awards.
And I like to chime in and just say that this is this workshop is primarily focused on, like I said, the grantsmanship, writing, working together, how to put together an application. But there's a lot of administrative stuff that can potentially affect how you work on your proposal, as Jason knows very well. So as much as I can, I'm kind of going to interject and ask these questions and kind of provide additional administrative information so you know how this impacts, other things. Like I said, it was a big surprise to some people who didn't know when they would transfer institutions that they would lose, a good chunk of, a small chunk, but a chunk of money from their K award as a result of just the transfer. So these are things to take into account when you are thinking about, like, your grants and financially planning ahead, especially as a new investigator, especially as someone who's received their first award, and don't really know how to navigate that yet. So hopefully this is helpful.
And I know from personal experience, it could take as about a year for you to be able to move an award. So both the institution you were previously at has to release it, right? Your current institution has to fill out all the documents and such once that grant is released. And then NIH has to process it as well. So I would count on, a year that it's going to take if you decide to move with an award. The next piece I wanted to briefly touch on is, right, you need to have an idea of how your grant is going to be reviewed. And so this may differ for some of the different funding initiatives that are out there. I'm not as familiar. I've never applied to NSF. I do know like the Department of Defense uses the same scoring criteria. A lot of other funders are starting to use this, but it's important just to know sort of the process. And part of what Maura and I are going to be doing with you all is offering some mock study sections. And so we want you to kind of have an understanding so you can anticipate, well, how would my grant be reviewed? So you can kind of plan for this. It's a way to be more strategic with your writing. So some of the things to think about are, the different funding announcements. Is it a special call? Is it an open call? The thing to realize is there's hundreds of study sections. So it may be difficult for you to determine which study section your grant will go to. And some considerations to understand: if you do a very open call, let's say, you can apply for this grant 3 different times a year, and the current funding announcement is open for the next 3 years. So these will go to unique study sections, and sometimes reviewers will not have expertise in your topic area. So each study section sees between 60 to 100 grants. And depending on that study section, right? So your grant needs to have 3 reviewers for it, is the minimum. And that reviewer could, depending on if there's only 20 people in that section and there's 100, right? They may have 5 or more grants that they have to review. It really just depends. So the way that your grant is going to be scored is on a score from 1 to 9, where 1 is the best and 9 is the worst. And then based on these scorings, all of the study section members, and I'll share in a few minutes the process, but basically they're going to evaluate your grant in terms of, is it exceptionally strong and it has no weaknesses, to the point where it is not very strong and there are numerous major weaknesses. And below, I give you a description of things to consider, right? So a minor weakness is something that the reviewer perceives this is easily addressable, right? So this is not going to substantially, impact your ability to do this research or to be high quality. Then there are moderate weaknesses. These are going to lessen the impact. So I'll talk a little bit about impact in a moment, but really impact is weighing all the different components of your grant. So the investigator team, your research strategy, looking at your environment, looking at the innovation that you're proposing, looking at how you're doing in terms of making the research you're writing about, can someone easily reproduce it? Does it have high rigor? So all of these kind of pieces are going to go in there. Remember, these are research grants. So the expectation is what you're doing is novel, right? They want to see something that's innovative, but also builds on the strongest methods for your field. So research design needs to be really strong. If it has major weaknesses, let's say, for instance, you don't have a power analysis to support the sample size that you're proposing, or your methods that you're proposing are not the strongest in the current field to address or answer the questions you're trying. This may result in some major weaknesses. It's also really important that you read through the funding announcement so that you can see some of the key areas. They often give you suggestions or ideas of the types of work they're doing, are wanting to support, as well as the institution will put out priority areas. So National Institutes on Aging, for an example, currently has a priority for Alzheimer's disease research. So if some of your work would fall into that priority area for the Institute, that will make you more competitive. So this is what kind of happens when your grant gets submitted. It is assigned to 3 reviewers. We have about 2 weeks to review your grant. So each person will get assigned all of those grants, and then about a week before the study section is held, they're expected to submit their preliminary scores. And we'll go over this more again in the future, but basically the NIH or other organizations set the key areas that have to be rated. And then reviewers are asked to give an overall impact score. So across these 3 reviewers, right, if your grant is scored between a 1 to maybe a 4, more than likely your grant will get discussed. But it's all dependent on, right, the range of scores for all the grants submitted. So if your grant were to fall on the lower end of the range, let's say you mostly got 4s and there are many more that got 2s and 3s, you likely won't get discussed. There is a potential that a reviewer finds your work really novel or important and could bring it forward to the study section during the review and ask that your grant get reviewed. What happens then in the study section, so I shared there's about 20 people in the room. Your grant is assigned a primary reviewer, a secondary reviewer, and then a secondary, or you can think about it as the tertiary reviewer, but you get 3 reviewers. So the first reviewer is expected to present the overview of the grant and summarize the strengths and weaknesses. The second reviewer then adds anything that the first reviewer did not include, or pieces that maybe are the reason for maybe a difference in score, and then it follows with the next reviewer. Then what happens, and this isn't a matter of like, some grants are only sent to the open panel for discussion for maybe 3 to 5 minutes. In this, other reviewers that are in the study section can ask clarifying questions to the 3 reviewers about certain concerns. They then ask, are there any concerns with your human subjects protections, your inclusion plans? If you're including any biohazards or other types of things, they'll talk about that. These are not necessarily score driving, but they will comment on them. Then the chair of the study section summarizes your grant in terms of the overall and the strengths and weaknesses. And then to all the reviewers, so there's 20 of them, they now have the opportunity to submit an impact score. And so what happens is they average across, sort of like add up all these impact scores, and you will get your overall impact score. This will range from actually 10 to 90. So a 10 is a perfect score. That means all the reviewers gave a 1, and a 90 would mean all the reviewers gave a 9. All right. Then they ask about any other aspects of your grant after the scores are in. Is there any issues with budget or data management and sharing plans, other aspects? So that's sort of the process for it. Okay. Now, then you go into sort of the thoughts around the overall impact. So I just wanted to give you a range to kind of understand what does this look like. So if you get a high impact score, typically a score between 1 and 3 or 10 and 30, you're more likely to be funded. But again, this is dependent on the overall kind of range of scores for the grants that were reviewed. Medium impact falls more into the 4 to 6 score, and low impact, obviously 7, 8, or 9. Typically, grants scored in that range are not discussed. So you can see here just sort of the key criteria that they look at. So they look at significance, the investigator team, innovation, your approach, which is your research strategy, and the environment. And all of these are weighted based on the reviewer's judgment, and then other score influences. So if you had a major problem with human subjects, that might influence their decision, or if your grant is found to be less inclusive. So here are just some examples across the different impact level to give you an idea of how you might be scored. So a 5 is a good to medium impact, right? But typically, most grants are not funded that have a score of 50 or above. So typically, grants that are funded right now, they're very tight, are going to be between like a 10 to 30. All right. So Maura's going to share with you about the grant submission timeline.
Thank you. I think you've seen this before. I think I've shared this before at the faculty meeting, but including it here again, just because I wanted to remind everyone that so if you're applying for NIH applications, and if there are 12 people who are applying for NIH applications in our department, as you can imagine, it can be a little bit crazy. So in an effort to kind of make things easier for everyone involved, this is the ideal timeline. Understanding that things happen and last minute applications occur more than I'd like. However, if we can all kind of aim for the ideal situation, I think that overall everyone will have a great experience. So if you, outside of things like if someone, the state just announced a new notice yesterday and it's due in 2 weeks. Well, there's not much to be done there. We just have to rush. However, most notifications come out really ahead of time, especially if you're looking at sources like NSF, NIH. So as soon as you have identified a notice that you are even potentially thinking about applying to, okay, you're not quite sure, but you have an interest and you want to, please just go ahead and throw it on my radar. I will add it to a list, and if you decide not to apply, I will not take it personally. I will remove it from the list. So once you have identified the funding notice, ideally at least 2 months beforehand, if you could please give me a heads up, provide all of the required information that I would need, to get your packet started. I'll read through the notification and provide you any pertinent details as well as special circumstances or considerations that you need to keep in mind for your application. For example, there are some R01s that say 500,000 direct costs only, right? And then there are others that say 500 direct costs unless there's a reason that you need more, in which case please reach out to us and we can talk about it. So, that notice that you give me allows me to identify those opportunities, discuss them with you, and then on your behalf reach out to the program officer, or you could reach out to the program officer and we could kind of work on a really like right well-rounded project together instead of trying to rush and cut your budget and really turn in something that like you don't want to turn in ideally, right? So, upon that, after all of that notice, between 4 to 6 weeks before application, I meet with you. We go over kind of all the details, any questions, concerns, things you're unfamiliar with. I'm happy to provide links, forms, resources to anything that you're unfamiliar with. You don't know what to do. If I have examples, I'm happy to share. Um, However, I do give a very clear cut, like here are the requirements, here are the documents I need, and here's when I need them by. And the better that you are about keeping your time and the better you are at communicating with me about things. For example, if something was due to me today and you said, hey, listen, I've been sick and I just really need 2 more days, that's totally fine. Please just communicate with me. I work with you. Um, Now, what I really would like is for the all of you lovely faculty members to really focus on the meat and potatoes of the application. Please focus on the content, the science, the writing of it all, and let me worry about the rest of the administrative things. I may need your help as the application gets close and things are getting kind of crazy and stressful. However, the institutional information, knowing whether or not formatting is correct, number of pages, word count, that kind of stuff is stuff I take my time and really meticulously review when I have the notice. Now, if you're giving it to me last minute, then of course my review and OSP's review will also be limited. However, we're also going to be doing the best that we can. It's not like just because we don't have the whole time, we're not going to review it. Okay. It's just we're going to do the best with what we have time wise. And lastly, please discuss with us whether or not there's a special portal if it's not like a major sponsor like NHS, or I'm sorry, NIH, NSF, CDC, any of those guys. If it's a smaller foundation, smaller sponsor, please let me know if there's a special portal ahead of time so I can investigate, so we can figure out whether or not it's something that the PI has to submit or if it's something that we can submit on your behalf. And of course, I provide final documents, a preview of your application before we hit submit. Usually, OSP will have to start and submit almost all applications with the exception of NSF. NSF, the PI must start the application and give access to OSP and us and myself. Every other application, OSP must start the application and give access to the PI and myself. So just make sure that you are keeping all of this time consideration in your mind, especially if you're working with smaller organizations who may need to register for certain things or have never worked on a project like this before. They'll need a lot of time and handholding. And especially if you're working with international sub recipients or any other kind of collaborator. Unfortunately, because of the time change, if I send an email, I'm not hearing response from England or Africa or wherever you're working, the institution over there for at least a day or two. So that can really impact our ability to meet deadlines. That's it for me. I hope I didn't beat a dead horse, but these are all the reasons why I'm not trying to rush you and stress you or me out, but I'm trying really hard to get the best quality application out so that everyone in this department has the best chance at getting grant funded. So thank you.
All right. So now we wanted to talk a little bit. This really ties to you're going to have some tasks to work on before our next meeting. And so I want to get you thinking about a specific aims page. For most of all the funders now, they require something similar to this. So they may have a different name for it. Sometimes they'll call it maybe like a summary or your initial kind of like a short narrative or something, but basically it's usually a specific aims page. And so whenever you're going to be thinking about submitting to a grant, I think the first step is to write your aims page. This should be really a succinct description that is a sales pitch of what you're going to be doing and your science. So here in this just image, you can see some different sections that are highlighted, but basically you need to describe the problem, tell us what is the gap in current knowledge, and suggest a solution. So your aim is really working at, defending that solution that you're going to do and demonstrating sort of the impact of your proposal in terms of addressing this problem, how it's going to support the field, and what are the contributions to future research. So this takes a lot of practice. I would say my aims page is typically edited maybe 20 or more times. And this includes sharing it with the investigator team and potentially experts in your field to get some feedback. Maybe you have a mentor or another colleague that isn't going to work with you on the grant, but is willing to let you know what do they think about your science and how you're doing and being persuasive. So you can just see in these colored options, there's a background I don't typically use these headings that they use. They did this more, I think, to chunk out the sections in the Ames page. And in a moment, I'll show you some more details when we think about sort of the anatomy of an Ames page. So you have this background, this overview, then you have your specific aims. These typically are your research questions, but they're formulated in a way to be an aim or a statement. And then they either have unique pieces around your approach or a hypothesis, or potentially describing if you're doing like more qualitative work that's hypothesis generating. Hopefully I was not on mute. Um, Here, I just wanted to show you some examples from my own research to give you sort of an idea of the different types of aims that you might look at. So the first aim is really a traditional aim. Has a statement, right? I'm going to look at the epidemiology and risk of Alzheimer's disease among sexual and gender minority people. And then I provide a hypothesis and what I expect in terms of what will be associated. The next aim is more of an exploratory one. So this is using qualitative methods. And so you can see here I'm proposing to do focus groups with the goal of identifying best practices for engagement, recruitment, and retention strategies. And then, oops, I'm clicking too much. The final aim is more of a process aim. So it shows you sort of, we're going to use this method to develop some new research questions is what we're proposing, or new measures. So in this, I sort of describe this as like the approach or sort of the process that I'm going to do to accomplish the aim. So you have to think about, the proposal and what it's supporting, but also describing your aims in certain ways depending on what you're going to be doing. So is it actually a research question? If so, if it's quantitative, you need to describe, the hypothesis. If it's qualitative, it needs to be more exploratory or hypothesis generating. And then if it's a process one, it's just really describing what you're going to do and what will come from it. So here I give you just an example. I think this can be really helpful when you're thinking about writing the different sections of your aims page. So this is using some different language as the example I showed before, but you can think about it as your background and your overview, the aims, and then the payoff, or sort of what the long-term kind of expectations of the work. So following this kind of structure can be really helpful for drafting the aims page. And I have even at points like highlighted parts of the text to be like, is this the hook? Where's the state of the knowledge? Where are the gaps? Where's the critical need in the opening? Then in the who, what, and why, this is really like what you're going to be doing. So it's a bit of that process, but it's tying together all of the three aims in terms of a larger picture. And often I have like my long-term and short-term goals in there. Then the aims, as I shared before, this is going to be like a statement or a title for the aims that basically links back to sort of your central hypothesis or main objective of that aim. And then you need to consider, do you need to provide a hypothesis or other supporting details like your approach or the expected outcome if it's, a process aim. And then the final paragraph of your aims page is typically the payoff. What is going to happen because of this? What's the value of accomplishing this research? Will it maybe set you up for a future clinical trial or intervention? Or is it going to lead to you doing a larger study? So you need to really describe, why should they invest in your work? Yep, go back. More.
Thanks. So thank you. This is like a really nice like table. I think I should post this separately as a handout. But okay, so you're talking all this stuff about, okay, what this is a project I'm doing. What is this going to lead to? Blah blah blah. So I guess could you speak just a little bit to about like as a new investigator, at least from my perspective, and the feedback that I receive from new investigators is that they don't even know where to start. It's kind of almost like they just pick one. They pick the most popular R21, R25. And they're like, oh, this is for new people. It's a lower budget. I'm just going to go for it. Um, Can you talk about that? About how like more long thinking, maybe more strategic you should be about that particular, strategy, just because I feel like there are ways in which you can apply for one that like kind of gives you the data and the, background to apply for the next level. And it's almost like it just makes everything easier, you know?
Yeah, so a lot of this you can think about, I shared the different mechanisms, and we can think about a pipeline for how some of this research supports you long term. So, right, if you think you would benefit and be eligible for K award, this is going to be more on research training. So you're going to potentially get some training and research skills. And usually what a K award also helps you with is getting preliminary data. So a K award can set you up for an R01 award. And NIH, as well as reviewers, really like to see a nice trajectory in terms of your training and how you're taking what you learn, to have an independent research program. So my major recommendation for you is always when you're thinking about going after a proposal, that it's actually an area of work that you have expertise in, and that it ties to a broader research program that you're focused on. So I'll give you as examples, right? I shared my K award focused on really looking at Alzheimer's disease and related dementias among LGBTQIA plus populations. All right, so I was looking at secondary data from medical record data, and then doing one aim focused on primary data collection, basically interviewing 60 people over the telephone to assess their memory and thinking skills. So I got training in that. I accomplished those aims. I published that work. That now becomes my preliminary data for my next project. And so my next grant that I went after at NIH was an R24. And this one was more focused on like capacity building. And so specifically, it was a special call where they wanted to create research registries to ensure greater diversity in Alzheimer's disease research. So using some of the preliminary data from my K and the training and the work that I was doing in Alzheimer's disease, we use that as the justification of we know there's underrepresentation of this community, but also we can do community engaged research to help to create this registry. That registry was focused on people with Alzheimer's disease, but also their caregivers. So I do that work. I start publishing on how we're accomplishing the pieces, presenting at conferences and such. And that led me to now I apply for an R01. And this RL1 was a unique piece. It was an opportunity to look at creating new measures for diverse communities around caregivers of people living with Alzheimer's disease. Well, I just shared with you, we created a research registry for people with memory loss and their caregivers. So I took that piece of preliminary data, we have this registry, we're doing the work with the community, and use that to write the RL1 to look at new measures. So you can see sort of the topic that I'm focused on is all about LGBTQIA plus people impacted by Alzheimer's disease. And all of the grants I submit to are focused in that area because I'm creating, a big piece that you need to be thinking about is both in terms of tenure is having your own independent research program that's your unique area that you have expertise in, but also to get it funded. It allows you to have a really focused area, and then all of your work starts being your preliminary data, right? Everything that you're doing. So I would say most of these grants want to see a central focus. If you're deciding, oh, there's a new grant that's focused on alcohol, or alcoholism, but you have never published or you are not actively doing research in that space, you're likely not the right person to be leading that work. So that's something to be really strategic about. Look at what your current research projects are, right? And this is why you want to have a really focused direction to the research you're doing. This will make you more competitive. to get grants. If you're just picking random topics, based on the opportunities, you may not be strong enough to go after some of these larger grants because you won't be able to demonstrate you're the expert in the field. They're really looking to fund experts that know the work. So that's going to be a strategy. It's an iterative process. It's not something that just happens overnight. It's something you build on. So think about it if you're focused on a specific disease and you're looking at it within a certain population, you might try to start being strategic of building that research and having multiple publications and grants that are on that one topic. And that will help you to be competitive. So does that answer what you were thinking more? Okay. We'll
Okay.
talk about this in future weeks too.
Can you put your mute on? Okay. Okay. I was gonna say yes, they answered my question. Thank you so much. And you gave a lot more information just because, like, from my end, working with people, here at least, I think it's important to hear from someone like Jason, who's very knowledgeable and has really been through the ringer a few times, and looks really good, right? Doesn't he look really good for having gone through so many? But just randomly selecting these funding announcements and not having any prior publications or no preliminary data or not even like anything preliminary to show for it, it's going to be really hard. I'm going to go ahead and tell you it's really going to be hard to get that award. And as the person who's reading through, editing, and putting together these applications, it really makes me feel bad that, people, especially, all of us, the whole team, all the people involved do so much work, so much effort, and you don't end up getting a grant because, maybe it was slightly off focus, or maybe you could have strategized it to a slightly better, more specific funding announcement, for example. So I wanted to, ask about that. I think it would be really great for other people to know kind of how to strategize and how to select. It's not just whatever's open and it happens to fall a little bit within the lines of what you do. Like you should be specifically, actively searching for very unique funding opportunities for you and your projects. So that's, I guess, what I'm trying to say. And you kind of reaffirmed all of that. So thank you.
I think the other piece I'm just going to add to it to remember, I just shared a few slides ago about how your grants are reviewed. And so realize that your grants are being reviewed by experts in the field who have expertise in that topic. So you cannot fake it, right? That you know this topic. Experts are going to catch that. They're going to see your publication history. They're going to look, have you ever done this method before? Has anyone on your research team ever done this method? Right? You're not going to do well if they're not confident that you can actually, carry out the research you're proposing. So that's going to be a huge piece. So preliminary data or demonstrating you're moving in that area is going to be so necessary. If you're like, we're going to interview 500 people to do this survey, and you have never done a study where you've interviewed multiple hundreds of people and none of your co-investigators have, they're likely going to have doubt that you can complete it. So that would suggest if you're going in an area that you've never done, you probably should be going after a K award or some type of training grant to give you the expertise and the preliminary data to be successful in the future. So just things to think about. We'll talk more about it. I'll share tips and strategies. There are some times when I'm not the lead or the expert, and so then I bring the methods or my area of expertise to the team. So if you want to go after a grant, but it's not your area of expertise, then you need to find someone else to lead it, or else I don't really think you'll be successful in getting that funding. And let's go to the final slide.
All right, everyone, thank you. So it's just us today. I'm going to reach out to each of you, and if it works better for us to just do this remotely, I think we might just switch the format. Or we could switch it from class to class. We're very flexible. This is the first time we've ever done something like this here at the School of Public Health, and so there's a lot of growing pains and a lot of feedback that we're to request from you so that every subsequent workshop we have, either for other new investigators or more intermediate or more senior, we can make things better. So please provide the feedback. It's welcome. I mean, be nice about it. If I don't, I might send you to Jason, and I don't know what kind of mood he'll be in. So what we want to do the next time that we meet on 10/18, remotely or in person, please try to find a funding announcement. And by the way, this is not like if you're not planning on submitting anytime soon this year, next couple of cycles, that's fine. Pick something. Like it's like we're doing a practice grant application together. And this is probably like the only time you're going to have an opportunity, not only with like subject matter experts, but also other peers who are having similar issues or may have suggestions, right? So we highly encourage everyone who signed up for this workshop, please attend remotely next time. Please show up with if you can't even draft specific games because you can't even get there yet, that's fine. Identify a funding mechanism. Identify a funding notice that you're really interested in, and then let's talk about why you're interested in it. And then we can assess whether or not it's appropriate and kind of go one-on-one and kind of counsel each other. I'd really like for us next time to remotely or in person assign accountability partners. So, we're not putting any rules on this. We're not saying you have to meet once a week and you have to have drafts passing back and forth every week. However, you really should select a partner that, works kind of similarly to you, or you guys could benefit from each other's styles and keep each other in check. If you say you're going to write a page, and even if it's the worst draft you've ever had in your life, but you need someone to review it, send it. Just send it. The more you do it, the easier it gets, and the more that you work with other people, the more collaborative you become naturally. And also, you'd be surprised at how many tips, tricks, resolutions to simple issues that you can learn from just like talking to other people who are also applying for grants. So I'm going to bother every single one of you. Okay, don't think I won't. Next time we'll plan to have a remote session, and I'll send materials hopefully sooner than I did this time around. I apologize for the lateness, but Jason and I are kind of losing sleep over a grant application due today. So every session like this will have like a lecture portion, then we'll have some discussion questions. Maybe if we need to do one-on-one breakout rooms, we're happy to do anything to kind of help the group. And please let us know what your needs are. The other thing is, and we'll bring it up a little bit more next time, is that there's an optional quarterly peer review session that we are offering. It's not something that's like standing. But let's say we get through 3, 4, or 5 sessions of this workshop, and you've drafted something that you really want someone like a panel, like a non-formal panel to review and give you your feedback, so you can start getting into the practice, the habit of these things. Then there's definitely opportunity to do that. We are going to have our first review tentatively scheduled for January. If you have any interest, please reach out to me, and I will kind of guide you along the way. But I think this is a wonderful, great opportunity for anyone who just is not confident or is inexperienced or is confused, or honestly, you just don't know where to start and you need guidance without any judgment. Please don't be the kid in school that's like all the way in the back struggling and you never ask any questions. Both Jason and I are pretty nice, most of the time when we're not stressed out about applications, and we're happy to help. So please reach out. This video will also be posted. All videos will be posted to the SPH Grants website, and any materials that are accompanying each session, I'll make sure to post as well as send via email to to all of the attendants. Okay. This is usually the time when we would have questions and discussion, but since it's just us today, I'm going to go ahead and end it. Thank you so much, Jason. Did you have anything else that came to mind?
No, thank you and see you in 2 weeks.
Bye.